You know, many people come up with their own analyses of the present crisis in the world, political, economic analyses, spiritual analyses. I'm under the impression, after reading your works, that you've attempted to reach perhaps deeper, further than any of these, because you seem to be suggesting that if we want to understand the source of our present crisis, human-created crisis, we have to go back to the dimmest reaches of what we call recorded history, to the very earliest of human civilizations.
Yes, I have a different take on it than most everyone, in that I don't believe that our problems are of recent origin. The Unabomber, for example, is convinced that our problem is really very modern, and that if we just go back a couple of centuries and smash all the machinery, everything will be wonderful again. And I trace our problems back to the beginnings of our culture, and make the point really that it is not humanity that is destroying the world. It is one culture of humanity, and happens to be our culture, which also happens to be the dominant culture on the planet, but that humanity has never been responsible for destroying the world.
What you're suggesting, and you have a very eloquent term for it, the great forgetting, that prior to about 10,000 years ago, the world was populated by people who had lived in harmony with nature for hundreds of thousands of years, and we have managed to forget an enormous amount about who they were as human beings and how they lived.
Well, we began by forgetting our origins in that world by the time that Plato and Aristotle and the classical philosophers were beginning to think about the human life and the meaning of our life here. They had all notion that we had a different kind of life before was gone, completely disappeared from our culture. And they had no way of guessing that we had a life before we began building civilization.
In other words, well, I suppose this is clearly exemplified by the fundamentalist version of the Judeo-Christian myth, which suggests that the world was created about 5,000 years ago, and as soon as Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, they began farming.
Yes, well, this was the common understanding, not just of fundamentalist Christians by any means, but by people of our culture from the beginning, because they understood that it was man's nature to be a farmer, just as it is the nature of bees to build hives, and that it's the nature of man to build civilization, just the way that it's the nature of birds to build nests. And they never doubted that, and so they went, in looking back on the origins of human life, they went back to the beginnings they could find, which were in fact about 5,000 years. And they said, well, humans must have begun right about here, and began building what we know of as civilization. And then when the paleontologists of the 18th and 19th century began to demonstrate that we were much, much older than that, thinkers were forced to tack on 3 million years of human life, but they were not reluctant to, or they were reluctant rather, to think very deeply about this. It was an embarrassment to them, and they assigned no importance to the first. It was
called prehistoric.
Prehistory, merely prehistory. It was something that happened before history, which of course just happens to be our history, the history of our culture. That's the true beginning of human life in our own mythology.
And even though there is some sort of romantic sentiment about the noble savages, by and large, I think civilized people around the world consider that to have been a horrible time to have been alive.
Very definitely. Yes, there is that twin pole there of thinking of them as having an idyllic life, but one you wouldn't care to have it. You wouldn't care to live that way, actually. Yet, oddly enough, wherever you do happen to find people who are still living that way, and of course they never stopped living that way, you find people who do not live anguished lives, which is one of the characteristics of our own culture. And this is not romanticism. This is quite true.
Well, it strikes me that when we think about these people, and we know indigenous peoples who are not part of our economic culture, our agricultural society, our wage society, and they exist throughout the world now, but I think by and large people, even looking at them, say these are poor, wretched, unhappy people.
They are, if your notion of wealth is our favorite toys. If you think of wealth as being computers and televisions and electronic games and automobiles and things like that, but if you think of wealth as personal security, as never having to worry about the future, if you think that's wealth, then you would look to these people and you would see wealth. But we look at them and we say, oh, they don't have any bathrooms, so they're poor. And they would look at us and say, it's amazing that you can manage to live such anguished lives as you live, afraid to go out, living behind locked doors, afraid of your neighbors, terrified of losing your job, terrified of how you're going to end up, living isolated, having to handle all of your problems completely alone. They would think we are terribly poor. They would really feel sorry for us if they could see us. And they would say, yes, you've got wonderful toys, there's no doubt about it. And we admire your toys. But to think that those toys make you wealthy is very bizarre.